Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of the DevOps Diaries podcast with me, your host, Jack McCurdy. Today I am joined by Varun Kavoori. Varun, hi, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Jack, nice to have you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. Varun, I'm really excited to talk to you about your experience. You are Principal Salesforce DevOps Engineer at Okta. Your insight and experience, I'm sure, is going to be super valuable to the listeners of this podcast and sharing what you've learned. I'm very excited to learn from myself. But tell us a little bit about your journey in the Salesforce ecosystem and how you came to be in the role at Okta that you are now.
Right. So I've been with Okta for the last 7 years. I've been in multiple roles. I joined in as a Salesforce admin. Later on, was more like an analyst. We were a pretty small team at that point. And the last 4 years, I've been working more on the Salesforce DevOps side of the things. And definitely Gerset has been one of the major tools which we use. We have been using Gerset for close to 3 years plus. We switched out and back again. But overall, the way I got into DevOps is basically as I was the point of contact for all releases, and I ended up being the DevOps point of contact as well while I was doing the Scrum or the Salesforce side of things. Overall Salesforce experience, I've been on the Salesforce ecosystem for close to 12 years. I've been in multiple roles as a developer, admin, and business analyst. More or less, I keep myself set up in such a way that I do all three, whatever is required, and be more effective on a smaller team where I need to wear multiple hats. That's how I got into the hat of the DevOps side of Salesforce.
Yeah, absolutely. You're like the Swiss Army knife Salesforce person at Okta.
Yeah, if there's something close by which we can reach, and if I'm the best person reaching that out, I would reach out to it. That's how eventually I ended up in the DevOps side, as there is an advantage to know what my customers and end users do on a day-to-day basis. So how does an admin react? How does a developer react? How does an analyst react? That kind of helped me out as I know more about the end users.
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite an interesting comment, actually. In your experience, if you look at things through your DevOps lens now, what are some of the key differences to how an admin and a developer and a business analyst think about DevOps, or do they even think about DevOps at all?
So DevOps is the critical function on any day-to-day operations for all admins, developers, and analysts. The way the thinking process is slightly different is because of the UI friendliness, I would say. Gerset does help us a lot on that area. For example, we can execute a lot of things. So for example, if our primary end users are all developers, we can plan more on the CLI part of things, or the GitLab actions, or GitLab runners and GitHub actions, those kind of automations. But when we have a much more array of users using it, we need more user-friendly approach. That's where Gerset plays a major part of simplifying all the XML files and things like that on a day-to-day process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest challenges for when I'm speaking and trying to educate the Salesforce ecosystem on DevOps admins who haven't seen code or what the XML looks like for the declarative functionality that they're building in the back end. Especially, you mentioned like GitHub and GitLab. When you start seeing those things in a branch, it can be super scary and can be super confusing until somebody actually takes the time to say, this is what it looks like, and this checkbox marked yes or no is just displayed as true or false or whatever it is in the XML. So yeah, I totally understand that. How do you manage releases at Okta? You mentioned that you were the point of contact for releases and then took over the more of the responsibility for DevOps itself. But run me through what the release process looks like. How does that work at Okta when you're planning your sprints, or how do you do all that?
So we do have a lot of functional planning. So the way I look at release is there are two areas of it. One is the functional side and one is the technical side. So there are two different processes which need to interlink or work together. Functional would be the approvals, the compliance, and how we set up the releases or the timelines of the releases. And the technical part is basically what is the source of truth, what tools are we using, and how do we get a change versioned and deployed into production, and resolving all the errors and whatever happens in between. To give you an overview of the functional side, we have experimented a lot on our schedules and on our not so much on the compliance part, and we have stuck with bi-weekly releases. So on a month, we have around 2 to 3 releases every week or every month. On the functional side, after a lot of iterations, we settled down with GitHub as our base layer for our repository, and then Gerset as our orchestrator, as well as the CI/CD and the compare tool, basically the UI part as well. So that is where the high level overview of how our release is set up.
Perfect. What for you when you were building like the functional side of things, and when you get into that release planning and sprint planning, how do you approach bundling tickets or blocks of work that need to be done?
Yeah. To take a step back, the way I approach things is I strongly feel there is a lot of information collectively. Just to give you an example, when I joined Okta, we were like three individual contributors working on Salesforce, and right now we're close to 90 plus, or close to 100. So the advantage for being such a large team is there is a huge collective information which everyone can provide to build a better DevOps setup. So I strongly believe collectively we are way more stronger than the 100x or whatever it is. So the way I approach is, even on the functional as well as on the technical side, is basically build the skeleton and then work with the users on building the pathways. So an analogy would be, I would rather build the buildings in place and then let the user decide how they want to walk, or how they want to create the pathways. And then once we know what pathways are being set up, then we can basically create that flow or create a proper pavement for that pathways. So the way an example for that situation would be, we let our users choose if they want to use a CLI to execute a PR or PR creation, or if they want to use Gerset to create a PR. That's where Gerset, I feel, is way more comfortable, as it's much more open on the use case. So for example, if a developer is comfortable with a CLI, they want to push changes from their local system, they can do that. And Gerset does handle the backend part of it, the PR orchestration part of it. And if some other user is not comfortable with the XML and they want a much more UI friendly comparison tool from source to a target, they can use Gerset. So that is one of, I would say, a major advantage point for Gerset, as well as for our process, that we let our users choose what they want to use. But the backend skeleton is still set up. For example, the branch protections are in place, the branch validation into the instance is in place so that the CI does not fail in the future. Those kind of details are rigid, but the rest of the process part of things is kind of flexible. Same with functional as well. I react to whatever my users provide me. At one point, we were doing weekly releases, and slowly we expanded. At one point, we tried a release a month, and then we ended up in a state where a bi-weekly release was much more comfortable with the scale where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting analogy, like about the buildings and the pathway. You've given them that secure way through the orchestration and the automation side of your process with the CI and CD and the promotion of PRs through your system, but you've given admins a way to do it in the way that's most comfortable for them, and the developers the way to do it that's most comfortable for them as well. But everything else that happens is based on what you've set up and how you need things to operate. Correct?
Yeah. Especially the system should not break. And
Yes.
the rest of the freedom is pretty much up for the users to set up. That's why the skeleton needs to be there. The CI, the checks, we should not let, for example, users stamp whatever they want or a bad XML into the system, which the validation kind of auto blocks. But once those core skeleton is in place, the rest of the operations on a day-to-day, we can let the user decide, because however they execute, the end goal is the same, getting changes into production.
Yeah. That's such a good way to do things, in my opinion. Giving developers and admins the power and the autonomy to work in the way that suits them, whilst having your robust protocols in place to make sure that they can operate in the way that they want to, and so that's compliant with how you do things. Do you find that the team like appreciates that, and because they're able to work in the way that they want to, they're happier?
For sure. I mean, as for example, if I'm operating as a developer or an admin or an analyst, I really appreciate what's comfortable. If I'm able to do what's comfortable for me. One way definitely we follow, or I follow specifically, is the information gathering only happens when we get the minimum viable product out as soon as possible. So we got that out, and obviously we got a lot of feedback of the users, and the users definitely appreciate what they have right now, as the flexibility helps and the UI helps as well. Like I said, UI team does a wonderful job at sorting a lot of complicated files and things for us. So so that the users definitely appreciate what flexibility they have, and same with the functional part as well. We let the users somewhat decide about the releases, more or less. Once we are much more bigger team right now, so obviously we're not as flexible as we were before. We are more like a bulldozer now. We can move a lot of things in one stretch, but we cannot dig a small patch hole somewhere or move a particular piece immediately. So there is definitely collective knowledge which goes into the DevOps. It's not just me. I don't want to take full credit for it. It's a massive team which gives me inputs on a day-to-day basis, points to whatever mistakes I make, whatever good things I make, and then we iterate over it. And it's a constant iteration process.
Yeah, absolutely. That constant iteration is, to me, one of those like foundations of DevOps. Continual improvement, constant iteration is so important for continual success, in my humble opinion. Anyway, you mentioned some of the guardrails that you have to protect your releases. What does that look like for you?
So there are two areas again: functional and technical. Functional is the compliance part, where the approvals are present, whether there are multiple layers of approvals like PR approvals. There are security checks which we are running on the Git layer. There are code scans which are running on the Git layer. So those are the functional, as well as some techno-functional area. On the technical side of the pipelines, the validation or the component validation is the most critical validation we have. So let's assume we are coupling a branch to a Salesforce instance. Let's assume the branch has maybe UAT and the instance has UAT. So to keep the CI in a healthy or in a self-service mode, we should be blocking users to not let anyone commit uncompiled code or uncompiled file into the branch. So for that, Geset has the status checks, which kind of initiates a component validation into the instance as soon as the PR gets created. That kind of controls, or that kind of closes the loop of, or blocks any bad, not bad, I would say, uncompilable change into the branch, which indirectly keeps the whole pipeline. And this iterates over multiple branches and multiple instances. So there are multiple coupled branches with coupled instances, which keeps the whole pipeline healthy. There are very rare occasions where, due to a package update or something like that, where the CI fails. That's when we manually go in and try to fix it. But more or less, the maintenance part is pretty low compared to where we were in the past.
Where were you in the past, out of interest?
So we were using chain sets. That was 5 years back. And
Right.
everyone starts from chain sets. That is the first step of Salesforce deployments or DevOps. And the next stage, we moved into GearSet for comparison. At that point, GearSet did not have the pipeline functionality, so we used it for a year and a half. And later on, we moved to another tool where there were pipelines. But as soon as GearSet got their pipelines out, we were back, because obviously the UI advantage, as well as the ease of use, the flexibility of the use is way higher compared to any other tool in the market.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And 5 years ago isn't all that long ago, really. Like, there's a lot of improvement in 5 years from change sets to where you are now, and the scaling the team from 3 to 90 plus is some journey as well. Is there any unexpected surprises that you've had from scaling a team, or if somebody is currently in a team that might have scaled from like 1 or 2, 3 people to 20 now, and they're currently sitting at 20 people, but they can foresee scaling to 90 in the next couple of years? What would be your advice for those people?
I would say, I mean, I know it would not be easy, because it was not easy for us as well. I think the first question is, why does the field take so long to get things into production? That's the first question we get from the business, as well as we were questioning ourselves as well. I mean, I was questioning myself on, is it actually, are we getting much more efficient or not? The analogy which kind of worked out, or the way I've convinced myself, or the way I think I'm convinced, which is logical, is, as I said, we when we look at larger projects, then we'll get a better picture. So once we see a larger project execute, then we'll understand, now we are a bulldozer, we can move massive earth from one place to another. But definitely there will be a con for it, that yeah, we cannot move a single field, where initially we were deploying one field or fields randomly, or creating it directly in production when we're a startup. We cannot do those things. As once we become a public company, there's compliance coming into picture, and there's more loss if some error happens. For example, in the old world, if we had more appetite for risk, but in the current world, we do not have such an appetite, because if our pipelines, for example, Salesforce is down for like 10 minutes, that would amount to a massive impact. But in the old world, the scale is lower, the volume is lower, so we can afford some risk taking in that context. But again, my analogy is basically simple. We are way bigger team. We move massive projects pretty quickly. In the DevOps context, we move 10,000 components in the same 2 weeks bandwidth as a single component. So we need to choose which direction we want to. In the currently at Okta, we have multiple instances as well. Like a smaller instance, for example, our federal team has a smaller instance. We let them choose what their velocity is and what their releases are. They kind of operate in a kind of a semi-startup environment, where they, as I said, we need to let the users choose the areas which is flexible. We cannot force them to follow the same commercial non-federal setup as for Fed, because Fed team is smaller. They operate in much more agile fashion. They have there is value to dig a smaller hole and execute it pretty quickly. Like for example, move a field quickly. So once the compliance and everything is in place, the execution is pretty quick on the Fed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hope
No,
that
that,
does
that
doesn't answer
yeah,
your
no.
question.
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. It's interesting. One of the questions that we get asked a fair amount, or that I'm always curious to find out about, is there any metadata in particular that causes you any issues that you have to like go outside the process for, and what are they, and how do you overcome it?
So there are a couple of metadata which we were not successful getting it into the pipeline. Again, it's because the way Salesforce structures the metadata files, for example, the profiles, we are not in, we're letting, or I would say, we're doing it manually at the moment still. The reason being, I feel, I mean, the Salesforce is trying to get out of profiles themselves as well. So any kind of junction metadata, as large as profile, permission set would also kind of fall into it. The page layouts would be one, is definitely tricky to execute. And that's not because of the process, or that's not because of the tool. It's more like how Salesforce structures it, as well as the massive array of dependencies on that particular file, that particular metadata. Again, as I said, our users prefer doing it manually, so we we are still doing it manually, but we do have a history of what's happening in that context. We did
Yeah.
try though.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's profiles routinely come up as one of those things that do come up with issues. It's one of those things in the state of Salesforce DevOps report that Gearset did last year came up, and Salesforce customers that have moved to like a permission set based model were able to release faster and had less pre and post deployment steps because they'd moved to that way of thinking and that way of working, and released faster than those profiles. But obviously, profiles are so embedded and so ingrained in a lot of customer orgs still that these issues still come up, or that consideration is still massive for a lot of teams. What does a release day look like to you? Like when do you press the big green button that says go? Yes, deploy our 10,000 components to prod.
Um, so we have a freeze on Tuesday. So whatever codes gets committed, we let it commit into until Tuesday. We cut the branch, or we would make the branch stale or stable for us in the release branch, and then our release or the deployment process starts. So for us, the time frame which we're thinking through is basically 36 hours. Uh, the reason being, on a Tuesday night, we execute the production test. We're in such a way that we're in a place where we run all tests for deployment. There are pros and cons for both. I know some orgs run specified tests, some orgs run all tests. We want to be on all tests because our instance is way more complicated, and no one person knows what would break in some other silo somewhere. So that's the reason why we chose to run all tests. So our tests run close to around 6 to 7 hours. So we execute on the Tuesday night, and Wednesday morning our release team comes up and then looks at what are the errors, or if there are any. If it's a happy path, there are no errors.
Yeah.
But even then, it rarely happens. There's some flaky tests as well. So once that comes into picture, we have all Wednesday to run our fixes. And once we run the fixes and we are comfortable with whatever fixes are there, we iterate over it. For example, if there are three test classes which are failing, in the next iteration of the fixes, we will not run all tests. Definitely, we'll run specified tests for just those three tests. Once we're comfortable with those three tests are passing, then the Wednesday night is the time when we run all tests again. with the fixes in place. And by Thursday morning, we have the deployment ready. So it's the 36 hours time frame, where the Wednesday is almost like a buffer if there is any failure. But we are, I would say, 95% we are successful on Thursday morning. It goes through. And for the worst case of the worst case scenario, we have Friday as buffer so that it doesn't run into the weekend. So this timeline came through after multiple iterations. So just reiterate, Tuesday evening is the cutoff. We initiate the test class run. Because test class run, there's no need to monitor. We can do it offline as well. So we initiate the test class run. In that 36 hours, anyways, it's all night, so no one is working. And then Wednesday morning, we come in the morning, look at the test class failures, check all tests, whatever fails, run the fixes for the whole 8-hour day. And then Wednesday evening, we run the full tests with an expectation that, it's going to pass. Where 99.9% it's going to pass because we already ran those tests.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you say code freeze, what does that mean to you? Does that mean that you don't allow any more PRs to be opened against any other branch in your process, or is it only to like UAT, or how do you compartmentalize that code freeze?
So code freeze, in sense, whatever codes get committed after that particular time, or whatever PRs get created after that time, will not be picked up for that week's release.
Okay.
End users can still operate. We are not blocking any end user operations for the release. The only thing is we're just taking a timestamp saying, hey, this is the piece which is going into production on Thursday. Whatever comes up later on, you can still commit, or we can still get it into the system, but it's too late for us to push it into the system. It'll go on the next release.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's just like we're not blocking you from working. It's just this is what we're bundling, this is what we're testing, and this is what we're going with. Do you ever find yourself in situations where the business is going, no, we need to wait for this thing to be ready because we want it in the next release?
So exceptions do happen. There are slightly more approvals required to get something into production. As I said, we do have some buffer time on Wednesday as well, where there is some wiggle room, but unless it's a Salesforce breaking system, or if the approval comes if it's a massive emergency, that's when we try to pick it up. But even in that context, we would wait at least until Thursday so that the release gets through, because anything we try to change might impact the release. Again, we let the users, or I would say the business, make the call in some contexts. But I know there are situations where emergencies do come in. So we do have an emergency deployment process, which is a functional as well as technical process, where we handle those kind of ad hoc requests.
Yeah, that makes sense. For anybody that's looking to advance their knowledge of DevOps or DevOps practices, principles, better Salesforce development in general, are there any tools aside from like GearSet that you would say, yes, this is really important to learn, or this is some of the techniques that I recommend, like an admin might want to take on or look at learning more about, so that they can be more successful as their orgs mature and their processes mature?
So any of the Git tool definitely helps. GitLab, GitHub, runners, or scripting definitely helps on a day-to-day basis. And more or less, I would say the concepts should be clear on the branching strategy. What I mean is how change moves and how it propagates, and what would be the base branches and things like that. That's something which I got to know once I started working on it. But they're very straightforward principles on that. But yeah, on the technical side, I would say anything on the GitLab runners, that area definitely helps, because whether it is Salesforce or whether it is any like NetSuite or any other tool, the the Git part of it is still going to be the base platform. It's more like the machine itself underneath it. And then CareSet is operating on top of it. So Git would be very critical. And any operations or any scripting on the Git side of it, can be GitLab or GitHub, would definitely help in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. One of those topics that never seems, whenever I'm at a community event or any kind of user group, learning to use Git is one of those things that comes up all the time. And like, what are your recommendations, or how do I learn this thing? How do I understand what this thing does, and make the best decision about what to do? And I think it's one of those things where if folks just learn, practice with their developer orgs that they might spin up, and just start to put bits of metadata into places where they learn to use CLI, or they use a tool like GearSet from the start to help them do that. Just incrementally learning and building up that knowledge and that understanding of that process is super important.
Yeah, and just to add to it, for Salesforce, if your question is related to Salesforce, I would say GearSet is wonderful. The 30-day trial is something which is so intuitive that pretty much anyone who has an idea, or any admin or analyst, they want to try it out, they can execute as well. I mean, in the past, I've used the trial just to execute to unblock myself for some situations in the past. So I mean, I would say GearSet is pretty confident on their tool. That's the reason why the trial is so simple and straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons that you're now a GearSet DevOps leader, you're such a great advocate for the tool and the platform that we've created, and we really appreciate that. What do you think? What do you think? What are your predictions for DevOps over the next couple of years? That's one of the questions that most people seem to be asking, is how AI is going to play a part in the DevOps journey. What do you think will happen in this space over the next few years?
So just to burst some bubbles, I guess, yeah, it's not going to replace developers, but and also the DevOps side of things. More or less, what I feel would happen, especially on the DevOps world, is because, I mean, the core concept of DevOps is basically our end users are the developers, admins, and whoever they are, to let the operations be much more efficient. And AI is something which is exactly on the bullseye in that particular area. So one recent project which we are trying to pick up, or which we are trying to execute, is the GitHub Copilot implementation. So we will still be implementing whatever is required, and it's much more. I would say, instead of in the past, what I observed is, instead of in the past, I'll try to Google and try to find out code and go into Stack Overflow, try to figure that thing out. It's a new way to Google. And we will be providing more tools on implementing more tools in that particular area. So implementing that, the DevOps, or I would say GitLab or GitHub Copilots and those kind of tools, or any enhancement tools, is going to be pretty critical in this industry.
Yeah. It's I see a lot of people refer to tools like that as like more of like a helping hand, or like a place to get started, just to give people a baseline and go, oh, that could work, but it needs tweaks.
Yeah. It's much more, I would say, a step up of the Stack Overflow Googling, which we used to do before. But more or less, it's definitely a huge helping hand. It's especially the syntax fixing and things like that. It's super helpful for anyone. Like, for example, after Google came through, a lot. I mean, I lost my skill set on spellings and remembering those things, because there's so much of autocorrect happening. So similar to that, I think we'll move to a better area where there's more value, where we can add, than the syntactual memory and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well as one last question, what do you hope for the Salesforce ecosystem as well as they kind of embark on their next journeys, and what improvements would you like to see with the platform, and or is there anything you're particularly excited about making the most of at Okta in terms of Salesforce products and what you might be able to do with it?
So yeah, we at Okta use everything on Salesforce. Our founders are from Salesforce, so we use Salesforce. I mean, we're a SaaS company as well, similar to Salesforce. So whatever they use, we kind of have a similar ideology on the products and things like that. Um, just to confirm on your question, do you mean the Salesforce on the DevOps side of the area, or would it be the whole Salesforce ecosystem?
All of Salesforce. Are there any like clouds or products or new things any of the new stuff that Salesforce brings out, or either any of the old Salesforce stuff that's out there that you haven't really had a chance to leverage at Okta yet? Is there anything that you're excited about and the possibilities of?
Yeah, I believe there is a lot of initiative going around with the Agentforce side of things in Okta. I mean, I didn't quite get a chance to look into it in a deeper context, but I'm really excited to know more about it. Overall, as I said, I moved into a DevOps role, so my exposure to what's happening on the end user or the business side has reduced. But hopefully, once they come to the deployment, that's when I'll get more eyes on what's happening in that particular area. But that's what I'm kind of really excited about. But yeah, overall, I see a lot of changes or a lot of progress been happening on the DevOps world of Salesforce. 5 years back, I was not even imagining, I did not even know the concept of pipelines when we were using chain sets or before that. And now things have changed so much. And to be frank, it's maybe 5 years back, if I looked at things, it looks complicated, but it's not at all complicated. As it's pretty straightforward. I think we can implement CareSet in a day and a half, I guess, max. Once we have the tools and things like that, or the basic concepts, once we get to know the basic concepts. So yeah, that's what I'm really excited about. I'm looking into a lot of new tools, or I would say really excited about CareSet as well. There's a lot of observability stuff which is happening. So that would definitely help us, as I said, know more about our user alignment and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, so that I get more information and make a better collective decisions on improving our platform.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that is absolutely a great and totally valid thing to be excited about. More information, the more information that we have, the better decisions that we can make in the long run. And I'm excited to see the growth and the continued success of you and your team at Okta as you carry on with this journey. Varun, thank you so much for coming on to DevOps Diaries and sharing your experience with the listeners. I found it really valuable and learned a lot from you, and I'm sure the listeners have as well.
Thanks a lot, Jack, and thanks a lot for having me.
You're welcome.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
I certainly did. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of DevOps Diaries. I will catch you again on another episode sometime soon.